Welcome to this week's episode of the Business of Real Estate podcast with Lynn, Hoffmann, and Eric Johnson. Today we're talking commercial real estate, specifically industrial commercial real estate. And we have an amazing guest here with us today that's going to be helping us talk about all the ins and outs, pros and cons of doing industrial commercial real estate transactions. Man, that is a mouthful. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking about industrial commercial transactions. And Lynn, I know luxury has its own things. We've talked about luxury before, but obviously commercial is a little bit different.
A bit different.
And so that's why we brought in an expert today. And we are fortunate to have Frank Salvatore join us from REMAX Escarpment. And he is our really, for the brokerage, he is the guy I go to when it comes to industrial commercial, if anyone's looking for referrals and that. So, Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's talk a little bit about how you got into commercial.
I got into commercial.
Because everybody goes into residential,
Right.
and then you get into commercial is different, right?
Right. Well, I started in the residential business when I was 22 years old, and I morphed into commercial real estate. I saw a couple of guys in the office that were doing commercial, and it really intrigued me. So about 8 to 10 years later, I started getting my feet wet into that. And then I started working for a international acquisition company, which primarily went out and purchased big factories that were in, basically coming to an end. And they were just idling there or moving to another plant or whatever the case may be. So we went in there and we brought in some of the big top guns there, big companies that went in there and liquidated all the assets. Now, primarily they were looking for companies that would, or buyers who would purchase lock, stock, and barrel. So all the machinery, equipment, assets, deal with all the environmentals. And that's when I really got my feet wet into commercial industrial. Since leaving them, I've just basically been focusing on large industrial transactions and going through all the pitfalls of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 environmentals and remediations and what have you.
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you brought that up right away, is because I think for, if you're an agent out there thinking about commercial, it is a lot different type of transaction. And I think a lot of people don't realize what all goes into it, right? Because as you said, like these different phases, and then there's remediation, and it's not just, getting the building. You got inventory, it gets involved. Obviously, the lawyers get involved when it comes to the HR side of things,
right?
With staff and that. But on your end, it's okay, especially industrial. They're dealing with a lot of chemicals.
You're dealing with a lot of chemicals. You're dealing with a lot of contamination underground. You're dealing with potential leakage of those contaminants on neighboring properties and what the impact of that is going to be. Not to mention, you're dealing with companies that really don't want to be involved in dealing with the asbestos or other hazardous chemicals that are inside the building itself. So they're looking for a buyer to go in. Now, the best way to sell industrial real estate if you're a seller is to get your phase 1, 2, and 3 remediation all up front, but most of them don't want to do that. They want to put that on the buyer's responsibility, which we just recently did one in Brantford on a large 60,000 square foot site. And we were fortunate enough to be allowed to do this during our due diligence period, and completed a phase 1, phase 2, and remediation prior to closing. Mm-hmm. So it was a little bit risky because if the remediation didn't go as favorable as we'd liked it to, then the financing would have been pulled. So that was a little bit of a risky situation, but we managed to get that all done.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, just for those, especially because we will have we have a lot of newer agents that watch the podcast.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that in terms of, let's explain a little bit about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3.
Sure.
And like you said, a lot of times the seller doesn't want to initiate it; they want it on the buy side.
Sure.
But what's a typical process when it comes to those different phases?
Phase one report is basically a history on the property. So you'll hire an engineer to go in there and just do a history on it to find out what was there before. Is there any risk of contamination? Is there anything that shows up in the reports itself? And once they do a phase one report, they can usually recommend, yes, we're good. We don't see any risk of any contamination. We don't need a phase two, or something might be triggered in that report that will say, I really think we got to start doing some boreholes. We got to do some digging. We got to do some sampling.
Right.
And then that's where the phase two environmental report comes in. A phase three typically takes about 3 to 4 weeks. A phase one will take about 3 to 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. Phase two is probably more like 4 to 6 weeks in order to do your testing and sampling and what have you. And that's where the fun part begins. So once you do your testing, if those contaminants exceed the regulatory standards, then now you're getting into potential remediation.
And just a quick question.
Okay.
So what would make you go and test, say, a neighboring site?
Testing a neighboring site, there might be something that is triggered in the report that says that the neighboring site at one point in time was contaminated.
Right.
And that could be, it typically happens when you're downgrade, and if you have an oil tank that is very close to the lot line. Gas stations is another big thing where you can have groundwater contamination, leaking from one of the tanks into the groundwater and then contaminating another neighboring site. All those things will come up in the reports.
I had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Typically then, so you said phase one can be 2 to 3 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. But is there a typical time frame? Say you were doing a paint plant or some kind of major plant, the one you were just talking about, 60,000 square feet. What would a typical time frame be?
Typical time frame is anywhere from, if you're going to be doing a full phase one, phase two, and phase three remediation, you probably need about 90 to 120 days.
Okay.
Right.
Because a lot of times agents are looking for things that go fast, and we know in commercial
They certainly do not.
they do not. It's
Yeah.
complete opposite of that. Yeah,
It-
I had an interesting experience years ago where the Shell station, the Shell refineries in Oakville, were closing all those refineries down, and all the new builds in that whole surrounding area
Right.
were all subject to having it disclosed on the property
Right.
about I guess it's the downstream effect of where those plants were to these other neighborhoods. So it can impact other neighborhoods around or other areas around the plants that you're dealing
Absolutely,
with.
100%.
And what is a typical type of plant? Are you doing gas stations, paint places, a DeFasco, a Stelco type of place?
Typically,
or?
we're doing industrial manufacturing plants.
Okay.
There could be big machinery equipment
Right.
in there, building generators, or, the one that we just recently did was more of a commercial appliance
Okay.
storage facility and repair. So they had an oil tank right outside the building that was sitting there for quite some time. Everybody seemed to have missed it until I got there and looked at it and said, well, I smell the oil. I can see virtually a steel plate right on top of it.
Yeah.
And then that's when all the red flags started coming
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
That's
It's interesting. It's not for the people that are impatient.
It's not for the weak at heart.
No,
And
definitely not.
If you're
that
looking
either.
for a closing in 30 to 40
It's
days, it's
not
probably
happening.
not going to happen.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was in terms of, when we talk about, we were joking earlier, is that, we're kind of 24/7. As
Right.
managers, we're 24/7.
That is not
for
a joke.
agents.
That is a reality.
No, I know, but it's, with residential, you have that 24/7, but when we get into commercial, it's a little bit different.
It is.
Because a lot of these guys, they're gone on the weekends.
They stop answering the phone at like 12 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And you can't get a hold, like we just threw in a $10 million offer on an industrial building, and we sent it off to him on Saturday. I still haven't heard from the agent yet.
Yeah.
Like, and I probably won't hear from him until, maybe noon or after today.
Yeah.
Typically commercial agents do not work on weekends. It's very hard to get a hold of them. Some of them do. We're definitely ones that work 24/7. I guess that's just, the being in the residential
Yes.
industry.
First, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has conditioned us to work 7 days a week.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
by the way, I don't mean it that, hey, you just want a nice cushy 9-to-5 job, get into it.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
not where I was going with this.
Sure.
Because like you said, it's hard to get a hold of people, right? And
It
that's the
absolutely
key.
is.
I think people have to realize that is that when you get into a commercial transaction is, yeah, you can say that 9-to-5, but these deals, as you just pointed out, take a long, long time.
They sure
right?
do.
And it's not like residential where you're getting paid very quickly. It could take, some of them could take a year or more, depending on how long it goes. But also trying to get the answers you want, or sending something to an agent going, like you said, you send it on a Friday or Saturday, it could be days before I hear back.
Right.
Which is a lot different than a residential transaction, right?
No, absolutely, 100%.
That's all. Don't go all rush into commercial because
No.
it's not that easy.
Well, a
it's not
real
easy.
good commercial agent will actually, once you receive the reports, actually study them and read them. And I find myself reading these reports at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because it's the only quiet time you have to actually get through it with the phone not ringing off the hook,
Yeah.
right? So if you're really dedicated at what you're doing, just because you may not be answering the phone after 5 or 6 o'clock as a commercial agent does, it doesn't mean you're not busy at your desk working away.
Yeah. Do you usually get involved in the liquidation of the equipment and the business aspect of selling the business, or is that the one-ofs? Is it a?
It depends. That's
Okay.
something that I'm very capable of doing.
Okay.
When I was working with the International Acquisition Company, I was right there assessing the assets with them and participating in the
Yeah.
auctions as well.
Okay.
And it's a really neat process. You have a live auction.
Yeah.
You also have it, monitored online, and there's a bidding process, and then there's certain protocols on how to ship that.
Yeah.
And we were shipping overseas. It was quite the process. It was a fountain of knowledge that I learned when I
Yeah.
was working with that international acquisition company, and it just made my job so much easier when I jumped into industrial manufacturing, selling of those buildings. It's like the light went off, right? And I knew this is exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time. In my other life, owned a manufacturing company and would typically go to New Jersey, Tennessee to look for equipment that was being auctioned off, like big, heavy
Right.
industrial equipment. It's fascinating, and
Right.
it's a whole different thing. So you like that part of it as well? That's another bit of an
I
interesting
do.
twist for you.
I do. I think it's
Keeps
all
it-
part and parcel
keeps it
to what
exciting.
we do.
Yeah.
Sure, we are real estate agents, and our primary focus is building and land. But when you get into all the other facets,
Yeah.
I think it just makes ourselves a little bit more credible. And again, we still do residential
Yeah.
and luxury homes and,
Yeah.
and things of that, and that's always going to be part of our business. But the industrial commercial stuff is, what I wake up for.
Who would you recommend, what type of personality would you recommend that this is a good fit for?
I would recommend someone who has an extreme amount of patience. If you're the type of person that, you need a paycheck in 2 to 3 weeks and you want a very quick closing, this is not for the faint of heart.
Okay.
And you also have to be able to navigate through all the obstacles that are going to come in your way. You're basically, one of the biggest things I think you need to do is you have to take on the role of being a consultant. I have the CEOs of these companies that call me in for their boardroom meetings and say, okay, I want you part of this. We need to orchestrate timelines. We need to do this. And you're basically a problem solver.
Okay.
If you're going to go into this business being an order taker, probably not a good fit for you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good to know. That's very valuable information, I think, for those that
Yeah.
are looking at at this? Because a lot of my, and I don't know why this happens, but a lot of my residential agents and some of my luxury agents do find themselves in this particular position and getting asked about these kinds of things.
Right.
Because a lot of the owners of luxury properties have a business.
Exactly.
So therefore, they kind of get asked the same question. I try to steer them to get good help and get support with that. I don't think it's a place that they should be without having full knowledge. But it's interesting how they how they become involved in it. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody, they
like
look at
different.
the price point and they go, oh, wow, that's a big commission check. But
Exactly. You're
there's
working
a
for
whole
it.
lot of work that goes into that.
Absolutely.
And I know this because I help organize our commercial division, but you know, we've had lots of conversations about how deals don't always fall through.
Right.
And you put in a lot of work.
And that could very well happen.
Because, like you said, all these, you know, all the phases, phase 1, 2, and 3, the remediation, plus on top of that, we've got all the HR. So,
Right.
so you need the lawyers that deal with employment law, and dealing with that, and then again. You talked about, hey, maybe financing doesn't come through on this, and that
Exactly.
that falls apart. And you got boards, because these companies are usually run by boards, and then
Yes.
you have all these personalities conflicting, and you put in a year's worth of work or more, and
Right.
boop, it doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Right.
And everything and anything can go wrong, and it's up to you to, develop the right team to navigate through all these obstacles. But, with the right agent and the right team, you can definitely get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to know what you're doing.
You have to know what you're
Definitely.
doing. Right.
I'm curious how many, when you look at a lot of these industrial properties, how many of them typically where it's the same type of company coming in? Like, are you typically like 90% of the time auctioning or selling off the equipment, or is it typically someone wants to come in, same type of business, they can utilize that equipment?
Our experience is usually you have a company that's coming in and doing something completely different.
Yeah.
They may turn it into a logistics center, or they may turn it into a data center, or they want, maybe it was just warehousing and now they want to turn it into manufacturing. So then you got to check all your zonings to make sure that they comply. And then sometimes you're asking for a variance to that zoning in order to allow that specific use in that property. There are so many different facets involved in this. And people say to me all the time, you make it look so easy. Well, yes, I guess because I've been doing it so long, it's second nature to me. And I think, well, you can do it too. I can teach you. It's just a matter of time. And they look at me and they see me speak in a boardroom and they go, wow, I just learned so much just sitting in and watching you speak and, what we had to do to get from point A to point B.
Yeah. What would you say is, because it sounds like you totally, I know you enjoy this.
I do.
So let's talk about what's the downside?
What's the downside? Well, the downside is maybe working your butt off for 4 months on a deal and then the bank pulls financing at the 11th hour.
Yeah.
That's the downside, and that can happen quite often. The one deal, for example, that we were working on, we literally had 3 approvals from 3 different banks, and they all pulled out at the last minute.
Oh.
So then we were scrambling, trying to find a way to make the financing work.
Yeah.
And then we found a lender and they said, okay, fine, we will do it contingent upon this. So now you're navigating this in order to get your final approval. So the downside is, the best advice I can give you is don't spend the money until the check comes in.
That should be for all real estate, period, not just that.
Exactly.
But you do spend an enormous amount of time on these projects, and although sometimes a luxury property can be a similar long time frame, and for whatever reason it can go south and nobody gets paid and so forth. That's the cost of doing business. But I think if you're going to get into this business, you need to understand what you're doing, eyes wide open, and
Exactly.
and know what you're doing. How do you feel about people jumping into this business, your specific type of work? What kind of background do you think would be suited? As well as patience,
Sure.
and calmness and ability to read documents and be very careful, do due diligence. What other personality traits do you think, or background do you think would be helpful?
Like, I think passion and desire is probably one of the most
That's always,
important
yeah.
things. I went into this thing as green as possibly can be. Yes, I had a construction background. I knew a little bit about it. I've worked in manufacturing plants and things like that on a construction standpoint. So I had a little bit of knowledge there. I think the willingness to learn. I think anybody can do this business. I would not discourage anybody who has the passion and the heart for it to do it. Yes, it's important to go and get some education. Learn a few things about different styles of industrial buildings, what certain things you can worry about, such as, how to deal with asbestos and contaminants and things like that. There's a fountain of information you could find on the internet to help you morph yourself into this business. So I would say, as long as you have the passion and desire, go for it. And most importantly, be mentored by someone who knows what they're doing. I think that is the key focus here.
Yep.
Totally agree. And the passion and desire, I think that transcends all boundaries in real estate. I really
Correct.
believe
Right.
that that's one of the key ingredients to being successful with anything that they do.
The experience will come,
Yes.
and as long as your heart and soul is into it, everything is going to come into place.
Yep.
Right? But make sure you get the right mentor behind
Mentor,
you.
I was going to say, yeah. That's really important. Yeah. How many, do you mentor people now? Do you have other people coming up in your team and business?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we recently brought in Alexandra. I met her at the awards dinner, and she approached me because she wanted to get into the commercial sector. And we had a few conversations before I actually hired her, and she definitely shows the passion and desire of doing this. Yes, we still do, luxury and residential and things like that, which she's excellent because that's what she was doing out in the Oakville area. We're now interviewing another gentleman as well too, who wants to do the same thing. And so I believe our business is growing, and there's going to be more to come.
That's great. That's good.
Let's talk a little bit about finding out about deals, finding out about, what buildings are coming up available, because it is a little different than residential,
Yes.
right? Yes, there are certain, at the brokerage, as you know, we utilize CoStar and LoopNet, kind of like MLS on steroids when it comes to commercial, but a lot of deals don't hit MLS.
They don't.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, and I remember when we did an episode just in general on commercial and talking about how, a lot of times these owners don't want to let the employees know, hey, we're looking to sell, because everybody will
Yeah.
panic and leave.
Exactly.
Before they can do this transaction. They need the business to continue. So what have you found has been sort of helpful to you? Like, is it finding certain places to network, or like,
Well,
how did that come about?
Look, I think CoStar LoopNet is a very valuable source if you're going out and trying to solicit, industrial owners or commercial owners who want to sell. And you can usually, there's great tools there where you can actually put in a name of a company, and you can see if they're in liquidation mode or acquisition mode,
Yeah.
which is very, very, it's a great tool. We've been very fortunate because I have this incredible database, and I'm becoming more and more recognized as a commercial agent. So I'm getting leads and referrals not only from our own agents, but from my own database saying, Frank, I need your help. I know this is what you do. Come on down, talk to me, and see how we can do it. Like, we have one client that has 3 industrial properties, and they're morphing or merging all 3 of them into one. So we've been very, very busy with that. These things are just falling into our lap right now, and I guess it's a lot of it has to do with
now, but you had to do a lot of work beforehand building
Yes.
up the relationships.
Exactly.
Because it is
exactly.
relationships.
No, it totally is relationships. I think once you get recognized as, this is what you do and this is how well you do it, the word gets out and then people come and gravitate towards you. But if you wanted to start from scratch, Knock on doors. Like I mean, it's just like you knock on doors in residential neighborhoods,
talk
knock
to
on
people?
industrial properties, and usually you can see if a business is dwindling or losing their profit share and they need, maybe they're thinking about liquidating. It's not that hard to spot those types of individuals as well too who are looking to liquidate.
I've done business sales, calling in on companies, and there's a different vibe. There's energies that you can read on when you go in there, like you said. Just, I remember getting some small little manufacturing, like
Exactly.
1 or 2 person shop, and you're
Right.
like, they're not too busy. They don't look.
Right. Well, on the
you
flip
can
side,
see whether they're busy or
They're not busy.
they don't have a lot of business,
Yeah.
and they
Sure. And on the flip side, you can definitely spot a company that is growing and busting at the seams, and maybe
And
they
needs a
need
new
something
building.
bigger. We have a lot of clients that are going from 10,000 square foot facilities to 20 and 30,000 square foot facilities because they're growing exponentially. So they're not too hard to spot either,
Yep.
right?
Have you seen in the last couple of years the increase in commercial availability, properties available? Are you starting to see more buildings being built for this?
Yes, I'm seeing a lot more industrial buildings
Yeah.
being built, even on spec,
Yeah.
where they're dividing up these 100,000, 200,000 square foot facilities into
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
smaller units
Yeah.
and leasing them out. So we're seeing a lot of that right now. I'll be honest with you, I'm a little concerned that it might start to become oversaturated because so many people are doing it. And I'm seeing so many buildings coming up
Yeah.
quickly. I'm not saying it's going to be like the condo market, but there has to be a delicate balance as well. And I think everybody's capitalizing on that because the price per square foot for industrial went from like $80 a square foot maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, now to about $200 a square foot, and sometimes even $300 on a really prestigious building.
Yeah.
So it's very attractive.
I know I've seen a big difference in it since 2021, and a lot more growth, a lot more buildings, like you say, being built on spec, and they're just these
Right.
monster buildings that they can divide up. So I just wondered if you were seeing that as well, because
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate in Ontario because we're almost like the hub. And Hamilton
Yes.
is a great spot because we have a harbor, we have an airport.
Yeah.
There's a lot of expansion and growth in this area, and I don't even think we've reached the tip of the iceberg yet in the GTA or in the Hamilton area.
And you're right. We've got trains, we've got the harbors, we've got all the access to the major highways, et cetera, et cetera. So you're right. It is like a hub. I think. I
Right.
think that south, this little pocket here is pretty good.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Which means that when you get into sort of the more, those industrial places that are not so much in that central area, it becomes a little tougher
It can.
when they're not on the major routes.
No, absolutely. Everybody wants proximity to, highways and borders and easy access to the industrial sector in the Hamilton area as well too. So it's a delicate balance.
Yep.
And I have another question. How is the foreign buyer ban affecting purchase of these kinds of buildings?
We haven't really come across that too much.
Okay.
We do have several foreigners wanting to purchase industrial property here, but the fortunate thing is they already have a base here.
Okay.
So although we warn them that there could be a 20% surtax on anything you purchase, they say, well, we're kind of already established, even though our head office is, say, in Pennsylvania,
Right.
this is what we're looking for, and don't worry, we have that covered. But if you
Okay.
don't, you also have to look at the American dollar versus the Canadian dollar. With the way our Canadian dollar is right now, even if you're paying that 20% surtax,
It's free.
it's still a very good deal.
No kidding.
Right?
So, no, just wondering about that with the U.S. Canada situation right now. It
Right.
could look very lucrative.
It could.
For American businesses to bring their business over here, if you're looking for space
Absolutely.
over here. Yeah.
Yes, 1,000%.
Yeah. Okay.
Just out of curiosity, anything that, coming into this, I know you were asking me, hey, Eric, any questions? I said, no, we're just going to have a nice
We're gonna have a
conversation,
friendly
right? But was there anything in your mind that you think would be important that we haven't asked or talked about?
You pretty much covered all the bases. I think the only thing is what we project is going to happen in the industrial sector, in 5, 10, 15 years to come. And although I'm seeing exponential growth in Ontario as a hub, I'm seeing so many investors investing in these big, huge logistics centers. And I am seeing more and more properties that are up for lease that aren't being fully leased. They're sitting there. And that is a little bit of a concern right now. Hopefully things will change in the next year or two as our, election gets underway and, these tariff situation gets resolved and, there could be a silver lining down the road.
Yeah, and we've seen, obviously office space ever since COVID.
Right.
We've seen that shrink,
Sure.
but industrial seems to be going strong.
It has been. For the last 10 years, industrial has been going very, very strong. And I agree, office space is dwindling. There's a lot of talk about repurposing those buildings into something more unique and different. And so if I had an office building right now, I would be concerned.
Yep.
But if you get really creative, you can probably do something really smart there and, start profiting on that.
And like you said, I've seen the warehousing too. It's the Amazon effect, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Everybody, hey, I can be,
know what we're
I can be a
talking
warehouse, I can be, but there's only so many warehouses
Yes,
needed.
yes. Trucking is becoming very, very big as well too. We're
Yes.
seeing, we have a few industrial lots and we're getting lots of calls for people who want to either park trucks there, the big semis and what have you, and build like a little mechanic shop. So that's becoming more and more popular as well.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Anything?
No, I think that's good.
Yeah, we've covered a
I
lot of it.
I think there's a lot of great information there, and certainly something that my aspiring commercial and industrial folks should listen to. I always recommend that they speak to a mentor and speak to somebody about this before they decide to jump in.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's a place that a novice or a green person should jump.
Yeah, don't go it alone. And
don't go it alone.
You might even be able to find someone that says, hey, you know what, you can do the legwork, I'll work on this
Sure.
with you
Yeah.
instead of just passing it off to us.
Yeah.
If you find the right mentor that is willing to do that, depending
yeah.
on how busy they are,
Yeah.
that's also an opportunity too. And I would recommend that if they really want to get involved in industrial and they want to work it and gain some experience. So that would be a good formula to work on as well, instead of just passing off the referral and letting us handle it. And it depends on the individual as well,
I was
too.
going to say, it depends on their level of passion for wanting to learn.
Correct.
And how much hard work they're going to do for their homework and their due
Right.
diligence before they jump in. So I think that would be a place where I would start with them saying, go and do your research, look up things, get your knowledge base, get it started, and then if you happen to get a client that is in that market, take it to a mentor and see if you can work together.
I highly recommend that.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of work. If you are thinking of getting into it, as we've learned, there's a lot of things when it comes to environmental assessments. It's a numbers game. There's tax implications. And as Frank said, it's not for the faint of heart. And you need a bit of patience. So definitely, if you do come across a deal like that, I always highly recommend referring that out to somebody, whether you refer it completely or getting the help and finding that mentorship, because it's not an easy task and it does take a bit of time. So I want to thank you, Frank. Thank you so much
Thanks for
Thank you so
having
much.
us.
Thanks, Frank.
This was
Appreciate that.
awesome. Thank you again, everybody, for watching us. We appreciate you following us. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe, follow us, like us. We are on YouTube, we are on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and just about every other podcast software out
Platform.
there. We so appreciate you. We will see you next week on the Business of Real Estate podcast with Lynn Hoffmann and Eric Johnson.
Thanks so much. Thank you.